This video is about my almost 2-month long process in making this guy. If that seems like a long time to you, that's because it is. This thing took way longer than it would have. Life gets in the way. Making other projects instead of the one you're supposed to be working on gets in the way. The reason I started this project is because of the trend to do with 1980s dark fantasy AI images that kept popping up for a while, and then all the videos of like Harry Potter in 1980s dark fantasy style, and I really like that aesthetic vibe, and I thought it would be cool to try and make a sculpture in that same sense. I did do that a few months ago now in my Minotaur video, where the basis of that idea was also trying to make a kind of dark fantasy style. I didn't have the kahunas to show up on camera and talk about it, so I just and let that thing play with not a word. So when I sat down to brainstorm, I thought about making a human character this time, because in this Shwady verse of dark fantasy, there's a Minotaur, and now I'm going to need a person to flesh out that world. I was going to use the opportunity to make a big buff dude again, because that is more or less what this channel should be about. When in doubt, go watch a video of me making a big buff dude. This is what this should be about. It's about muscles. I like the nostalgia of fantasy. I think in general there's a kind of nostalgic feel to it. The reason I started sculpting was my discovery of the Shiflett brothers, and through them I discovered Frank Frazetta, who is the king of fantasy painting, and the Shiflett brothers should be known as the kings of fantasy sculpting. And both Frazetta and the Shiflett brothers have deeply impacted the way I create art in general, but in this case they're the main inspiration. To start, I thought I'd throw a little curveball in there and make it on top of an art mannequin. I've never liked these things in general. I think proportions might be fine, but the posing is just nowhere near realistic enough, and I know a lot of people have that complaint. So in order to get the right vibe and pose, I actually popped its shoulder joints out of the socket to make something that worked, that had a bit more character and kind of bravado. So after finding the right pose, I sealed it with some Aves epoxy, and then once that's set for 24 hours, I had time to think about what I was going to make. Playing around with the idea of this gladiator maybe, which would mean he wouldn't need that much armor, which would mean I would get to sculpt big, buff muscles. So the lore in my head was starting to shape. We were starting to get some ideas of who this guy really is. I was imagining this is a fantasy movie from the 1980s, and it's a bodybuilder who got a bit part. But this wouldn't be like the main character. He shows up just long enough to make an impact, like a cult classic character. I started with the anatomy. 1980s bodybuilder big. All I'll say about that is it's not natty, but it's sick. Kind of loosely based off of how Dorian Yates would have looked, I think, at the time. In the 80s, he probably looked like this. Generally a thick core, but still quite defined. Not quite bloated yet, but a kind of thick core with big arms, but that aren't too big when compared to just the trunk. I also moved on to the face pretty quickly, and I decided halfway through to just put a beard on him. I thought it would work with the vibe, and it would mean I wouldn't have to do too much detail with the bottom of the face and just focus on the eyes. So for the eyes, I used some resin eyes from Juliana Lapine. I'll link her in the description where I got these eyes on our Etsy shop. I also used them for my looks maxing video. I want to check that out too if you like this video. So after I baked the face and the body, I thought I'd move on to the armor, decking him out in some fantasy garb. I needed something kind of bulky, I think. I wanted to make the armor feel as intimidating as him, and so it had to be bigger and more intimidating than his frame. Anywhere I didn't already put muscle, I put armor, basically. I covered up his back with a cloak. I made big armor on his left side, like the whole arm was armored. There was some chainmail as well. And on the other arm, I covered up the forearm with a gauntlet, essentially. I also wanted lots of belts. I wanted to add some detail in general on the fantasy side, since, I typically focus on anatomy, so I pushed myself a little bit on making it feel like fantasy. That being said, I'm lazy, and I had to figure out a way to add lots of detail without going crazy and just, scribbling on armor. So what I did was Took some bacon bond, I lathered it up, and then I swirled it about with the back of a paintbrush, and it made some pretty convincing looking detail. Also, it's as nonsensical as AI detail. You know, when the armor in an AI image is just squiggles made to look like armor, like shiny metal. That's what I did. I did exactly that, and it worked. One shoulder was looking kind of bare, so I decided to put a lion on it. Originally it was supposed to be a lion, like a lion pin, not an actual lion. But then, you know, after I made the lion head, it looked really good, looked really realistic. So I thought maybe I could just paint it to look like an actual lion and go with that. But problem is, it's really small in comparison to his head, which presented me with a quandary. Do I go ahead and make it look like he killed a baby lion and put its head on his shoulder? Or do I make it look like he's just huge, like a full-on giant, and it's a regular sized lion that just looks small in comparison to him? Neither of which gave off the vibe I was looking for, so I just kind of went with the badge idea as per usual. I'm gonna be honest, the boots could have been more detailed, but I was starting to run out of steam and I really wanted to paint him. So I just went with some basic shape, trying and make it look like leather, and I was gonna paint it black after. Just keep it simple, leave the detail everywhere else. This is where you say it's on purpose, but I'm gonna be honest, that was pure laziness. Same for the cape. Could have been way more detailed. I could have really added more detail to this piece. Now looking at him, there's some good detail on the armor, but yeah, I really was just trying to get to the painting. All right, we're here. The final step, painting. Usually in these AI images, there's a green and red color scheme. I've always been a fan of the green and red color scheme because I love a challenge, and making it look like it's not Christmas theme is the goal. Making something look cool with red and green without making you think about Christmas is the holy grail in art. So before getting into all that, I start with the skin tone usually. Favorite thing to do is grab my Crusader Skin speed paint bottle from Army Painter, and I put it on unprimed baked Super Sculpey that's beige. And something about that mix just makes something slightly translucent, and it's perfect to give off a skin feel. There was a problem though, because of the cracks earlier that I sealed up with super glue, it didn't look like skin anymore. There were white lines that I decided I'm gonna have to figure out how to cover later. For the beard, I covered it up with some brown, and it wasn't quite right, but then I put on some hardened leather, also from Army Painter, also a speed paint, and it gave off a pretty good vibe, especially since I'd already put some lines in there, and the speed paint kind of crept in and gave some nice detailing. The armor I was looking forward to a lot. Reason being, I decided early on I wanted it to look like bronze because I was playing into the red and green contrast. The technique I use for that is usually put on a base coat of turquoise, then a dry brush of bronze, then a dry brush of black, then a streaky wash of turquoise again, and one final bronze dry brush. I got that technique, I don't know from whom, unfortunately I forget who I got this from, but it is a mini painting technique that comes in useful at any scale. Rest of the colors were pretty simple. The real poppy part was supposed to be the skin and the armor, so I went with some camo green, some dark green on the robes around his waist, blue. Then a problem occurred where for the belts, I used the same kind of brown and brown wash that I did for the beard, which means they didn't look distinguishable enough to realistically be two different materials. So I decided to switch it to black, and I think that worked pretty well. Nothing really screamed fantasy about this piece yet. It's all pretty realistic. Could just be medieval. So the sword was where I was going to make this thing magic. In a lot of the AI images I use as reference, there's a magic sword, and it's often red, just an opaque red for some reason, and I thought that looked pretty cool, so I tried it out. Didn't really work for this piece, so I thought I'd take the opportunity to tie it back again to my Minotaur sculpture, where I tried making a red hot metal sword that was supposed to be glowing, and that didn't work when I did it last time, so I thought I'd try again, but be a bit more mindful in the blending. So I went over the red with a white, then a yellow, then an orange, then a red, and then a brown, working away from the parts I wanted to be the hottest. I then did a final touch up with some black to try and make it look like parts of it were almost completely cooled, and that was it. Done and dusted. 2 months. I'm very happy with this piece, but it did take way longer than expected. That's fine. That's part of the fun. I will say it doesn't quite have the vibe I was looking for, which is why you'll see right behind there, I actually started another one because while I was working on him, I just realized it's not going to be the kind of piece I was aiming for. I wanted something a bit more mysterious or felt a bit more magical. This wasn't cutting it. So I just leaned into the gritty, real aspect of this one and then thought I'll do another project. And starting that project slowed me down, and then starting another project because I was getting bored of fantasy also slowed me down. The more art you make, like the further on your art journey you go, the more you have to work with yourself and accept that you get bored of stuff. Personally, I get bored of stuff pretty quickly. Only recently I've been able to stick with a project for more than a month. Used to be I'd just hurry up and finish that thing so I can move on. Now it's like, oh, I'm getting bored. I don't want to rush this piece, so I'm going to move on to something else. And I have several projects on the go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's what I'm saying. Hopefully one of those is the next video. Knowing me, it's just going to be a brand new one you haven't seen yet. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.